Hi, and welcome back to part 3 of Naples. This is Only a Bag, a travel podcast. I'm Darcy, and with me as always is...
Nathaniel Mellor. Thank you again for what is hopefully just going to be a very short episode.
Yes, it's going to be a short episode. We're making that promise to ourselves and to you.
So how are we going to start this episode?
Okay, so we're going to talk about language and culture, right? That's what this episode's
Yeah,
on.
language. Yeah, exactly. What makes Naples Naples, maybe?
Okay. Let's briefly go over culture before we get into language, because we've already talked a lot about Naples and rambunctious children, how everybody is like strongly excitedly from Naples. They are Napolitano, but they're also really excited to share that with you, and they're just generally nice people like everybody else.
If you wear a Maradona jersey, you will fit right in.
Love it.
I mean, people will
love you.
Love you.
One thing we didn't mention is something that I love, and I keep bringing it up in conversation. We were on the train, the Leonardo Express, recently coming back from the Rome airport into Rome, and there were people behind us speaking in English. And one of them he's from Rome, he lives in Rome. The other one is American. And
Canadian, but that's fine.
Canadian, sorry, he is Canadian, sorry. That's very different. I'm very sorry to all the Canadians. But they were chatting, and the Roman guy was talking. He's, saying, "Oh, you have to visit Naples. You have to visit Naples." He's explaining what Naples like to this guy, and he says, "There's a thing about Romans. Some Romans love Naples. Others love Milan." And I'd never heard it put that way, but that totally makes sense with what we've heard.
It also, I think, plays into, we've talked about this maybe 1,000 times, but it does play into Rome's identity. When you're from the south, you view Rome as the north, and when you're from the north, you view Rome as the south. Mm-hmm. Even within Rome itself, it finds this really chaotic balance between the north and the south. Like, there is definitely some order, which you might find in the north. There's definitely cleanliness. There's definitely, I hate to say it, competency.
Structure.
There's building codes.
Yeah.
Basic things, and then there's also a complete lack of everything, such as anything else that you might require to live. But it's almost like it exists on this weird little, not even a precipice, like the point of something. It could fall if it goes too much of one way, but it doesn't. Mm-hmm. But I think that's a good point. It's either you're in Rome but you admire the north, or you're in Rome and you admire the south. It's a very divisive way to put it, but it's pretty accurate.
Yeah. I don't know. I thought it was a really interesting way to put it. So that is basically a comparison. In my mind, it's a really interesting divisive comparison of the North and Naples, which, I mean, you could call the South, but it's very much its own place. So yeah, I mean, that's basically, that's the culture. We've already talked about it,
And I think
it's chaotic but beautiful.
That's, I think, the thing. It's hard to, and I think people who know more about Naples would probably be able to put it more into a better.
Astutely, yeah.
Astutely, no, but it's kind of like, it's like, how would you describe the culture of, like, we're from Georgia, or Savannah specifically. How would you describe the culture of Savannah? It's like, I don't know, it's slow. People like that little, they're mint juleps. I don't know. Do they drink mint juleps in Savannah?
Nope, I think that's Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay, well, I was so close. There's horses in both those places, right? No, but it's like, I don't know how you describe like the sort of culture, but I think two things that do play in the culture are language and customs.
Yeah.
And actually one third thing, if I may, really quickly, I just thought it'd be very interesting. We didn't talk about this. Maybe we haven't.
Is it the coffee?
Yeah.
Extended coffee?
Maybe.
Extended?
So, suspended.
Suspended. There we go. Yes.
Yeah. That was it. You want to explain that?
Yeah, sure. I think I can. So there is a culture in Naples and also in the South.
In the South, in general, but Naples is kind of, well, in the South,
Naples is known for it.
And I think the South is more you pay for somebody else's coffee. Naples.
That's a good point. Okay, so there's a distinction. You're right. Okay, so where we are, I'll start with that because I know it well. Where we are is not suspended coffee necessarily. It is a culture of if you're at the coffee shop, you're getting your morning coffee or your 10 a.m. coffee or your after lunch coffee. You're there. You're at the cafe. You're at the bar. If people come in who like your colleagues, your family friends, your best friends, it's customary for you to pay for them, and vice versa. If they're in the bar first, they pay for your coffee. That is not what is it? Extended?
Suspended.
Suspended. That's not a suspended coffee necessarily, but Naples is known for suspended coffee. And what that means is that you go into the bar and possibly pay for your coffee, but then you pay for the next person's, and the next person gets the free coffee, and they pay for the next person's, and so on and so on.
And it depends. I think it works. I mean, now imagine, dear listeners, that you're listening to this. It's like a pay it forward thing. That's
And
exactly
people
what it is.
like end up doing it at Starbucks and whatever you hear in the news, like, oh, it happened with 45 cars in the Starbucks line today. Yeah.
There would only be slightly different, I think, in the sense that you'd pay, and oftentimes you'd take the receipt for the other coffees, so you can pay for 1 or 10 even, and you put them in a little bucket or you put them in a little thing. And I will say, Naples is famous for it, but also it's very much dying, that sort of idea. It was huge in, I want to say, late 1800s, early 1900s. There was a much larger wealth disparity. Funny enough, we're coming back to that wealth disparity.
So the tradition might hold strong.
But there's a huge wealth disparity between, obviously, the rich and the poor. And but it was because coffee is still so much part of the culture. Like going with a day without coffee is sort of like this, you really got low. So it became common for, if you're doing slightly well, and it wasn't so much even just the wealthy paying for the coffee of the poor, but like if somebody just got like a little bit more from that week's wages, or if they're fishermen or fisher people, fishermen. I think there's a lot of fisherwomen in the late 1800s.
Back in the day, no.
It might have been. No, if the catch was slightly bigger than normal, you pay two extra coffees, or that kind of thing, where it was it was just sort of like, if you struck a little fortune, share it around a little bit. And then it really made a resurgence during the war, World War II, I believe. That was another thing. Again, a lot of people were just really poor, and it was like, hey, I can get my coffee. So all that is to say that I think it kind of plays in the culture of, and I was talking about, I think maybe 2 episodes ago, it was like broad strokes, but the Neapolitans are, I think by and large, have like their sort of a generous, open people, if you can categorize them as one group of people, and that's impossible to do with any group of people. But if you had to, it's, I mean, I'm saying that in a sense because I think, Paris gets, they're sort of like, oh, they're all snotty and whatever.
Plus here, people still here, meaning the small town in southern Italy where we live, people still warn us about going to Naples, like, oh, it's so dangerous. The people are so dangerous. They're not nice. You're going to get mugged and everything you have is going to be stolen. And I think that was very much probably a good warning for 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Not that people were bad. It's just like, I would appreciate the warning if it was a dangerous place, but that's not who, the people of Naples are.
And my guess is too, it probably never was. It was just simply for a period of time, crime was bad and corruption was bad, and it was harder to be there, and it was much easier to find yourself in a bad situation than it is today. I think is my guess. It seems, from what we can tell, it seems like that's the thing, because it's always had it seems like everyone's kind of always looking out for each other in Naples. That seems like it's always been a big, and I'd say when in Naples, I mean, because that kind of even spreads to Salerno and where we are, just especially outside of touristy areas. There's still a huge culture of looking out for
absolutely
people.
Yeah, there's always a village around you.
Exactly. But one of the interesting bits, I think, is as you were going to lead us into, is talking with your hands. Talking with your hands.
Okay, so talking with your hands is obviously very Italian, and it's also like an Italian stereotype, which is often true. One cool thing that I heard about recently, and again, I'm going to be typical historian me, this is going to be inaccurate, but quickly, I heard this really cool story about an experiment.
On another podcast.
On another podcast.
Can you remember which one?
Oh no, but I will put it in the
like a little shout out.
I'll put it in the description, because it's I have like a few top podcasts that I listen to and I love them, and I do want to shout them out. I just want to make sure it's the right one. But they're going to hear this and be like, Darcy really got it wrong. So the point is that the broad strokes are that a group of Italians were a group of Italians volunteered to be a part of an experiment. And a group of, I believe it was Germans, and they were taken to like somewhere neutral, meaning language neutral, like Switzerland maybe, where neither of them spoke the language, but they were told they were each told individually a story, and then they had to recount that story like a children's story. Like the dog went up the hill, blah blah blah. They had to retell that story to someone new, and the experiment was to see which group of people spoke more with their hands. And I think that was the original intent. But what they ended up finding was that both groups spoke with their hands, Italians more so, but my main takeaway is that they spoke differently. So Germans were quite literal, like they were describing physical shapes using their hands that related to the story, where Italians used their hands to like put emotional emphasis on things rather than literally describe things. So I find that fascinating. I probably butchered that explanation, but that was the gist. And living here, that's super obvious. I mean, the way people talk with their hands, sometimes it will be to describe a physical shape, but often it will just be like emotional emphasis on their story. And Napolitani have their own language in hand signs that is not Italian, but is very much a structured language, very specific to them. And we have a family member. He's Italian, and he often does both Italian gestures and Napolitano gestures. And there's one that I love that I asked him about it once, and it's like you could tell he does it without thinking about it. I think it's Napolitano, but it might be Italian. But basically, if you make like a thumbs up sign with your right hand or your left hand, but your dominant hand, and then you take your thumb and like rub it from your cheekbone down to your chin, almost like a half smile on your face.
Well, he does that, but because I think it's supposed to be basically from your temple down to the corner of your mouth is where it's supposed to be.
This.
But he goes almost around following the jawline, which is his own little, like, I guess, sloppy take.
It's like his own slang on it, maybe.
Yeah.
But it means beautiful, right?
Like good looking.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that guy, yeah. But also what do we? I think Spanish is guapo, no?
Yeah.
And that's also, again, if you've listened to episode 2 episodes ago, one of the reasons we're trying to give so much history is because there's French influence on the food, there's French influence on the language, there's Spanish influence on the food and Spanish influence on the language. And that's that whole thing. I believe in Napolitano's guapo is handsome, good looking. Like, and so there's that little hand signal to go with it. And that's actually...
It's pronounced slightly differently, though, isn't it? It's like guapo.
It's pronounced without the G, usually, guapo.
It's like a soft G.
That was the... It's funny because that's the I mean, people talk about like Italians in New York were called wops or whatever it was, or whatever. It's pretty much exactly what it was. No, but it's apocryphal that it would have stood for without papers, WOP. Zero evidence actually pointing to that, but it would have more likely been, according to a lot of linguists, that Napolitano would have, like, their mothers would have been like, go have a good day, guapo, like, good looking, you look good, handsome. But it might have even been short to WAP, just because just
like groups of guys talking to each other, like calling, because groups of guys here do, like, they'll say like, hey dear, ciao caro, exactly, and ciao bello, to each other. It's very sweet, and so it makes sense to me that as a non-linguist that they might have said like, hey handsome, like,
oh, hey handsome,
yeah, like to your friend,
But I mean, also people might use it to you, just thinking, "Oh, you're handsome." Is that you're such a? And I think that might have been that's basically leading assumption of where WAP came from in America, coming from Napolitano, guapo coming from Spanish guapo, which that was interesting. But also, there's a hand sign from basically the temple to the base of the cheek, the middle cheek, the corner of your mouth, basically saying, "Yeah, good looking, handsome."
There's another one that he does that's is it your forefinger, like your pointer finger, or your...
I thought it was the pinky.
I thought it was sometimes the thumb.
It's one of his fingers. It seems to change. But it's like making like a...
It's like almost if you had a dimple in your cheek. And he's
like screwing into the dimple.
Yeah, with your finger.
Yeah. And then be like, was it good?
Yeah, like it tasted good, basically.
Yeah. And I think, well, you're talking about it, but I was going to say one thing is the reason we mentioned these is...
the book of them?
Well, no, I was going to say more. The book of them is fascinating, but I was going to say more... when we first went to Naples, and people do make these. I mean, they are really common. Like whether
like it's just a part of the language.
Yeah, there's the hand sign for we're gonna leave. There's a hand sign for like it feels a little uptight in this room.
There's also the hand sign of like we're gonna was one for we're gonna leave, and then we're gonna leave together.
Yeah,
which is like you put your fingers together, and then
there's like we gotta run. I don't know. There's a couple different ways of saying we're gonna leave. But I always say that because a lot of times, especially with the little. It was good. It was a little screwing their thumb in the cheek kind of thing. I don't know how... I sound like a psychopath trying to describe this. No, but people would do that at restaurants and stuff. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. Is it terrible? Is it good?
But I think you could also... I think we as humans, when we travel, we're insecure. Like you're in a weird place. You're not in your normal area. And it's easy to think that people are making fun of you or taking advantage of you or somehow being negative. When really that's very rarely the case, but it's so easy to think that as the person, out of touch, basically. But I think I definitely thought when people made certain gestures, like, oh my God, they're insulting me. When it had nothing to do with me or was very much just an emphasis, like a regular part of their conversation.
Well, I think there's also, and I think it's more Italian than Napolitano, but come here.
Yeah.
I think, so in America, when you say come here, it's palm up and you sort of pull the person towards you.
Like you pull all your fingers back.
Yeah. Here, it's palm down, but for whatever unknown reason, it starts with flicking the person away.
Yeah, it's like a shooing motion in the U.S.
And the first, maybe 10 times we saw people do that, we would leave, thinking they meant leave. And then we found out, later from a friend of a friend, they told you to come and you walked away from them. I'm I thought they were shooing us. It's a shooing motion because it's essentially you flick all 4 of your fingers up and then they kind of let them come back a little bit.
Yeah.
And then flick them up again. So I'm no, you're not pulling me closer. You're actively telling me
away.
to leave. And that was super confusing because, again, conversations were going really well. And then all of a sudden they're flicking their hands at you and you're like, oh my God, okay, we're getting shooed. I guess we're going to go. And then they're like, what are you doing? I just invited you in for coffee. And then the last one, sorry, now we're on a roll, but the finger wag.
Oh, yeah. And is it like a, yes. Which, again, I don't know if that's Napolitano, but they definitely use it here in the South. It's a finger wag and
And it's just a finger. So they're just a little finger. I mean, nobody can see me. Nobody can see me,
but I did it slightly wrong.
Darcy, come on. What kind of a historian are you?
It's that, teacher mom thing of oh, you really messed up.
It's so devastating to hear the first time. I was almost getting angry. I'm like, what did I do? What the? And then I was like, oh my God, I am really overreacting in this situation. Because it's I think it's your parent does it when you've done something wrong, or it's when somebody's being condescending. That's the other thing. Do not condescend to me. But then it's
here. It's not that.
Yeah, it's even I think there's one guy. We were walking somewhere and he was driving and we're trying to get out of his way. So he stood on the sidewalk and he wagged his finger through the car window and then he's and then he starts reversing, but it's just to be oh no, I don't need that, I'm good, I'm not, you don't have to.
Yeah, it's not like you're wrong. It's oh no, thanks, you didn't have to do that.
And sometimes even getting something we'll be at the grocery store and there's a small alimentari and we'll grab I don't know, if someone will grab something and they're no, and they'll get the other one. It's a better one. Fresher,
yeah, exactly. And it's never you were doing something wrong. It's that one's not good.
Yeah,
choose the other one.
No, don't worry. So I only say that because that's something we were going to make a video or something about to kind of really show people. But only because, again, there's this you mentioned as a good way. It's anytime we're traveling, I think we're insecure. We're just we don't know the language, the culture, the customs, the food, anything. And I think when people do hand signals at us, we're just what does that mean? Yeah. And then if I can only imagine the first few times somebody does we're oh my God, am I
I've done something horribly wrong.
Why are you being so mean? I didn't think I did anything. And then I realized, no, I'm completely misreading the hand signal.
Yeah.
So with that all being said, yes, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's I mean, I think a lot of that is just Southern or Italian hand signals, but there's a whole language in Napolitano of hand signals that go along with the language and that people just do innately. When babies learn to speak with their voices, they also learn to speak with their hands. And it's amazing. And there's a great book, we should probably put it in the description. It's Come te l'aggia dicere. Is that what it is? But it's a book explaining in Italian or possibly in Napolitano.
Probably get it in English, actually.
Oh yeah, you probably could. It's probably on Amazon or something, or your local bookseller could possibly order it for you.
There you go. Support those local booksellers.
But yeah, explaining Napolitano and gestures and signs. It's very cool.
Yeah, and I think we're going to talk about this in some future episode. Is just because people do ask us all the time. I feel which is it's a weird amount of times we ask something, but do I need to learn Italian before I go? And it's do people speak English or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we're often very clear, and we'll go in depth more in another episode. You don't really need to learn Italian. There's definitely some phrases and words that would certainly be helpful. People definitely light up when you speak a couple words. I think people are very, especially in the South, they're very excited that you're attempting to learn their language and they want to help. And it's, again, I don't think you need to learn Napolitano gestures before you go, but
I would say maybe don't, just in case you do it wrong and offend somebody.
That, I was thinking like even the finger wag or the come
Yeah.
here or the there's a handful in that it's good to know what they mean kind of
Yes.
thing. I think sometimes, especially if you're going to Naples in the south. If you're going to the north, it's fine. If you're going to Rome, it's fine. But only because sometimes it's used to communicate something silently.
Definitely.
Rather than verbally. I mean, that's what they're for. But it meant like, so whether it's from across the room or whether it's like, again, your server from across the room, or whether it's somebody who's bagging your groceries or whether it's somebody
And
who's
also
asking.
because some people speak quite quickly, and even if you understand some words of Italian, it can sometimes be hard to understand if you're like in a loud restaurant or someone just talking really fast, you're on the street. You might not catch the full sentence of what they said, but if you recognize a hand gesture, you can probably pick up the context of what they're saying.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
That might be a helpful instance.
And then when you know, at least if it's positive or negative, like I think that
Yeah.
would be the simplest thing. But you mentioned the language, and I think that brings us to the last part of this episode, and then literally the last part of part one, the only part this entire thing was supposed to be. No, and it's language, and we've talked about this before in I think the Florence episode, and we kept saying like when we get down to Naples, we'll talk about it more. Now we're here. Welcome. No, so essentially, as a brief history, the other reason we were given this history lesson at the beginning, if you guys listen to that one, if you all listen to that one, is also to explain a little bit, and I think it's going to be something we're going to constantly refer back to, I think, the more we talk about the South, especially Campania, because we want to talk about the Cilento later, like the sort of region along the coast. We want to talk about all these beautiful places that are really quite undiscovered by any tourists, let alone by just like, I mean, let alone Italians. I mean, Italians, I think maybe have discovered, know some of these places, but they're very undiscovered. They're very local. They're big in the summer or whatever it is, if it's at the beaches. But they're still quite unknown outside of Italy. And the reason I mention all this is because the language is, believe it or not, different in the South. And as a very brief history lesson, as we've talked about before, Naples was, for all of history, pretty much its own kind of place. Nobody really nobody wanted to destroy it or rewrite it in their own way.
And like we talked about, like it was very much taken over, like it exchanged hands, but it maintained its identity.
Yes. And I think, yeah, exactly. And as we mentioned in, I want to say the Florence episode as well, the Italian unification is when 1860 something is when Italy was Italian, the language that we speak today, was chosen to be the national language. Prior to that, a bunch of different countries, a bunch of different kingdoms and duchies and whatever it is, little city states basically, that all had different languages. And by and large, the languages were derived from Latin. So when the Roman Empire fell, or during the Roman Empire, most people spoke Latin to some extent, if you were cultured. But as we've talked about in the Naples history episode, it started as a Greek colony, so they spoke Greek, and then it became a Roman colony. They spoke some Latin, but mainly still Greek. They were allowed to keep their language. Then it went to at various points, the Normans or the French, basically the Aragons or the Spanish, Ostrogoths, the Byzantine Empire. It sort of had all these influences into the language, and it's fascinating because still today, the Napolitano language is very much a vulgar Latin language. Is based off of Latin, but it has so many loan words from other languages. I want to say it's kind of similar to Malta. Like Malta is the small island near Sicily, but it's like half the language is Arabic because it's over the years just been a part of various, like I think Saracen Empire sort of things, and the Turkish I think only controlled the island or owned the island for a while. So I think their language today is like half Arabic. There's something about people who are Maltese can either understand Arabic or Arabic people can understand Maltese. Now, it's one of those weird little things where it's like, oh, I think I actually understand this. And the reason I'm mentioning this is it just kind of goes to show like the unification was some 150, 160 years ago. But that Napolitano dialect is still widely spoken it's still the language of Naples. Everybody grows up speaking dialect. A lot of menus are written in dialect. A lot of signs are in dialect. A lot of songs, also
songs, movies, TV shows. Yeah.
All in dialect. There is Naples has a cinema scene. Then they have to dub it over in Italian for people to understand. And then, of course, outside, so like in the region of Campania, and a little bit into Basilicata, a little bit into Calabria, a little bit into Puglia, just because of how big and how powerful Naples once was. That dialect still exists in some sort of more altered ways, if that makes sense. But at least where we are, while the town we're in has a separate dialect from the one across the valley or the one up the valley or the one, 20 miles away, 30 miles away, they're all still based loosely off Napolitano. Not loosely, kind of quickly. I mean, not quickly, tightly off Napolitano. Like they're very much...
They're all descended from Napolitano, but they each have their own influences.
Yeah, and I think just fascinating because, again, it's one of those things that goes to show that's like... I don't know, I just like the idea that, because English is very similar to that in the sense of it has tons of French words, it has Germanic words, it has, I just feel like it has loan words and borrowed words and smashed together words from all over the place.
And certain areas do have their own dialect.
And I think that's fascinating because Naples is a very good example of, something... I don't know, 15, 20 million people speak Napolitano, something like that. And it's only funny because I think we looked at the CIA handbook is great for a lot of like little interesting facts and tidbits. But they have like, I think we looked at this before. It was like the population of Italy is about 67 million, give or take. And they have that there's 67 million native speakers of Italian. They're basically based on the assumption everybody who's born in Italy
natively speaks Italian, but that's not true.
That is very much not true. And it's, Italians, I think like English is taught in schools in America. Let me rephrase that. English is taught in schools in America, but I think that almost more refers to how to write in English. I guess it refers to speak English, but I'm thinking like the English what we take, it's not English as second language. It's English for people who already speak English.
I would say now English as a second language is taught in most schools.
Yeah, but I was thinking before that's not that long ago, but I'm thinking like elementary school.
Yeah, 20 years ago when we were growing up.
English class and spelling tests, it was how to teach you how to speak better in your native language. But here, a lot of Italian, there's still a lot of, you go to school and learn Italian because you aren't learning it at home. You're speaking whatever local dialect you are at home. So a lot of kids in this area grow up minimum bilingual, but oftentimes they learn French or Portuguese or Spanish or French. I already said French, German, or something like that in school, or English especially. And we met a lot of kids who you have to learn one more Romance language and English. So the idea is by the time you're done with high school, you're at least fluent somewhat in English, some other Romance language, your dialect, and Italian. But it's just, I don't know, to me, it's just fascinating, this idea that like once the Roman Empire sort of crashed and burned, a lot of these languages were broken up and split off. And so the Italian language is the Florentinian dialect of Italian, or of Latin, doesn't really resemble Latin, but a little bit. But, so that was chosen over the Napolitano dialect or the Lombardian dialect or whatever else. But it's fascinating. So with that being said, if you're studying Italian and you're like, I'm going to go to Italy, I'm going to speak with people, I'm going to love it, and you come to Naples and you cannot understand a single word people are saying, you're not alone. We are often find ourselves in conversation with somebody where we are understanding because we're still learning Italian, we're getting it, and then it switches, and then we have no idea what's being said. And so that happens pretty frequently. But if you've been like hitting the Duolingo and you're like, I'm so good at Italian, I'm going to be killing it when I get to Italy. I'm going to be buongiornoing it up. And then you get here and you're hit with the buongiorno for the first time and you're like, okay, I don't know what that is, but it sounds like buongiorno. But then you're hit with something completely different, like pasta fazool instead of pasta fagioli. You're like, that's a different word entirely. And I think your favorite.
My favorite? Ngoppa.
Yeah. Ngoppa, yeah.
Ngoppa means sopra, which means up.
Yeah, so Italian is sopra, but the dialect for this, pretty much the region is Ngoppa.
Ngoppa, which has a G in it.
N-G-O-P-A.
Yeah.
Or N-G-U-P-A, Ngoppa. So that's a fascinating thing. I mean, there's a lot of these, so the differences in some words are not like, a letter or two. Sometimes it's just, the Italian word's Italian, word. And the Napolitano word might be Spanish or French, or I think even here where we are, I think somebody found, they were doing a little comparison and found that the dialect word for, is it coffin? Or the dialect word for cemetery or graveyard is the same word in Arabic as it is in this local dialect.
Yeah.
But this region has had a lot of, again, like raiders is what Saracen raiders, raids, mostly from Turkey, I think, up and down the coast. That's why like Italy has all these fortifications up and down the coast, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of the dialects were very heavily influenced by the variety of raiding,
People moving through
people moving
all
through.
the gym.
Yeah.
Not to put raiding lightly, but just there were other people moving through for other reasons too.
Sure, there's somebody that was not raiding when they came down here. Like, it's a beautiful location.
Yeah, just going for a trek.
Yeah. So I think that's everything. I think we've, instead of one 45-minute episode, we've managed 2 50-minute episodes and a 30-minute episode.
Nice.
I think Darcy's tired now. She's run out of words. She cannot find them.
I have. It's so much talking, but it's so much talking. But we've only scratched the surface of Naples, and that's all we're gonna do for now. I think that's enough.
And in the next episode, what we're gonna do is move outside of Naples. We're gonna talk a little bit about, like, not the history of Pompeii, to be very clearly, but just kind of like why you should go, how to get there, and to make sure that you feel comfortable when you're there. Like, should you stay in Pompeii? We'll talk a little bit about Herculaneum. We'll talk a little bit of like Pozzuoli, Baia, a few of these other places that are a little less seen, but still fascinating.
And all around Naples.
And all around Naples. And then we'll finish that next episode talking about Sorrento, because, I mean, come on. Why would you go to Naples and not go to Sorrento and have a lemon?
Sure.
I mean, come on.
And just have one lemon.
Yes. It's famous for its lemons.
Okay.
It's like going to Meyer and not having a lemon. I'm sure it's a place. Could just be a person.
Or maybe Key West.
There you go. It's like going to the Keys and not having a lime. Mm-hmm. Going to Sorrento and not having a lemon.
Okay. So we're going to talk to you about places and lemons next episode.
Thank you all so much, seriously, for listening. I realize we probably sound more and more tired as this episode goes on. Again, we were prepared for a very short episode. Mm-hmm. The coffee is worn off. Lunchtime is looming. So have a lovely rest of your day.
Mm-hmm. And feel free to contact us here or on Only a Bag or my website, Darcy Melton Fine Art.
A little plug.
Find us
there.
on Instagram.
Right.
I'm Darcy Melton Fine Art on Instagram, and you are...
Nathaniel Faro Mellor. We also have Only a Bag Instagram, I think.
Mm-hmm. We do. You can message us there. It just needs to be revamped, but we will find you. We will see your message. Message us if you have any questions.
But we're back.
We're back, and we'll be talking to you some more next episode.
Thank you all so much for listening, and
thank you. Have a good day.